to this special ILF podcast where we're discussing International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I'm Lucy Webster, journalist and disability campaigner. I'm joined by some ILF users and its chair to have a chat about this important day. Susan, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Susan Douglas-Scott and I have the honour of being the chair of the board of directors of ILF Scotland, and I'm very proud of the work we do, and it's a passion of mine that we support disabled people across Scotland to achieve their independent living outcomes, and I'm always trying to campaign to make that more, so that we can work with more disabled people, because ILF, apart from the transition fund, which is for younger people under 24, the main part of the fund is a closed fund that we inherited from DWP. So we're working very hard to get that changed so that we can be, working with any disabled people who would want to come and talk to us about their independent living outcomes. I'm a disabled person myself. I have been all my life, and I then qualified as an occupational therapist and worked very closely with disabled people using ILF when it first opened. So I'm that old, that's where the grey hair comes from, in 1988, to leave institutions and to have their own homes. And it was such an exciting and scary time, actually, where people were, for the first time, taking those responsibilities and becoming part of local communities. So it was amazing, and spoke to and met amazing people over my career, which brought me to ILF. So that's me, really.
Great to meet you. Nic, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Nic. I have been using ILF since 2005. I became a full I was born with a genetic condition, which sort of deteriorated a wee bit over time. And I first became a wheelchair user when I was 21, so that was 2001. And tried to find out what sort of funding and support was available, and kept hitting brick walls and stuff. So it wasn't until I had heard of ILF through a friend of a friend that I tried to start asking about it. And at that point, no one had heard of it. No one in the council, no one, I didn't know how to apply. And it took till 2005 to actually get someone, a social worker, who knew what ILF was and how to apply for it. And it's been life-changing. I think more people should have access to it.
Michaela, can you say hi?
Yeah, I'm Michaela. As I'm sure you can tell by the accent, I'm from Northern Ireland. I'm 31 and I'm a wheelchair user, but I'm also deaf. So I was born without ears and I've used hearing aids when I was a week old. I've been using ILF funding since I was about 16 or 17, so almost 15 years. And I matched that up with some social services funding. So I have a full 24/7 package with 2 people with me around the clock. I have a genetic condition which has a lot of complex elements to it, and it's that ILF funding that has allowed me to do everything that I love to do with life. It's enabled me to learn how to drive, because if I didn't have a PA to come with me on a lesson, I wouldn't have been able to do the lesson. So it's given me a lot of things that I just wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. And on a kind of more professional note, I do a lot of work in disability campaigns, fighting for better rights, but also trying to improve outcomes for people who want to live independently and want to do whatever it is they want to do with their lives. So I work professionally on that on the side as well.
Well, great to meet you. The theme of this year's International Day of People with Disabilities is securing rights in the future after the COVID-19 pandemic. I would love to hear all of your thoughts about what needs to change now and in the future to create a level playing field for disabled people. Can I start with you, Nick?
Yeah, sure. I've learned myself over the time that I've employed PAs, whenever I've been short staffed or anything like that, that my level of disabledness, if you like, totally depends on the support that I've got. So if I have a good support around me, then there's really nothing I can't do. There'll still be places I can't access, but like if I have the right support, then I can fulfill what I need to get done and I can be a productive member of society. But if I don't have, then I'm pretty much bedridden. So it's that sort of difference between being able to participate in society and be a productive citizen or to just sit in the house all day. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like this kind of support, this level of being able to employ someone that you know, that gets to know you, that gets to know your house, where everything is, it's got to be better to support everyone like that, and probably more cost effective to support everyone like that than to leave people sitting where they've got like 4 15-minute visits a day, and you know they just get looked after like a pet in a kennel. Basically, you know, you get your basic, you get washed, you get fed, you go to the toilet, and that's it. You know, that's not a life, and people need to be able to live life to the fullest, and like I said, to participate and to make a positive contribution.
Definitely. What about you, Michaela? What would you like to say?
Yeah, so I think for me, and I've said this a few times now, but I'm going to say it again. I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic. We went, you know, if I think about February of 2020, and you know, there were no events that were virtual really. They weren't there. There was, you know, very limited capacity for remote working, although I was one of the lucky ones and I had that ability. People who were in education were fighting to get educated properly. They couldn't get remote access to learning materials. You know, even in terms of the NHS, it was more structured around, you know, you can get things done better as an inpatient than you could an outpatient. And the pandemic changed a lot of that. And I think we need to not return to where we were. We need to kind of keep some of those options that all of a sudden made disabled people like feel like they weren't disabled anymore. Because ultimately disability is a man-made construct. It's not, you know, I wasn't diagnosed with a disability, I was diagnosed with an impairment. And when the pandemic hit, all of that melted away. And that was a really euphoric state for a lot of people for those first few weeks. But I think also in terms of current support, what I mean, I have funding from both social services and ILF, and I would like for all of my funding to be from ILF because it's more person-centered. It understands the needs of someone like me who has been disabled from they were very young, who has needed support from they were very young. And it's a different mindset to what I would call adult social care in social services, where it's all about money and red tape. And then you have ILF on the other side who are amazing to work with. So I think that is one of the major things that would really level the playing field for someone like me, but it would also save the government millions of pounds because the funds are being administered in the proper way.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. You both mentioned access and the change in the pandemic. What effect did the pandemic have on you guys personally? Let's start with Michaela.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a shieldar. I have been shielding for almost 650 days now. So I started shielding on the 12th of March, and or 12th of March 2020, and I've been here since. So it's had a profound impact in that sense. Those first 6 weeks were very stressful. We couldn't get food deliveries, and I have issues with swallowing. So actually getting food that I could swallow was really tough. and I couldn't access PPE for my staff. I couldn't get a mask for love nor money. So that was a really, really difficult period of time. And actually, once you kind of get beyond that, it's had a lot of really positive impacts. I feel like my employment opportunities are much bigger. I have more options open to me in terms of what I can and can't do. But I think as we have moved back out of lockdowns and away from the restrictions that we have needed, it's created a little bit of a vacuum. Where I feel like my needs aren't just as considered. And in that sense, we've gone backwards. At the same time as having a lot of opportunity to move forward. And I think, for me, the pandemic has had a profound awakening for me. It's awoken me to what is possible, what we can do when we really put our minds to it. And I also think it's allowing people to understand just a little bit of what disabled people face every day. They were told they weren't allowed to use the front door of a shop, or they were told there were no toilets available. It had a little tiny inkling of what it might be like, and they didn't like it. So I hope that people will remember that, and that actually whenever I'm able to stop shielding and it's safe for me to go outside again, that people will look at me in a different light, not with pity or sorrow or heartbreak. I think this a lot of the time I get, but actually with a renewed sense to include people like me in the community. But ultimately it's had a real awakening, and the pandemic has fired me up for disability rights and disability inclusion. And I just can't wait until it's over so I can start using some of that learning and that work throughout the pandemic to make life better.
I think that's so interesting how you talk about real cons and real pros, and I guess a lot of people would think it had only been cons, but for disabled people there had been some positive. I wonder if Nick, that chimed with your experience.
Yeah, definitely. Michaela's made a really good few points there. At first, it was really stressful because we couldn't get PPE, and even though you trust basically your staff that they're going to be following the rules and they're going to be, strict hygiene and all that, you've got to realise that you're worrying then about their family and who their family have been in contact with and who they've been in contact with. So it was very stressful at first, and there was no PPE or tests or anything like that. So, yeah, but after a while, there did start to be the positives, like Michaela was saying as well, that you think people maybe get a wee taste of what it's like to not be able to go just wherever you want, whenever you want, which is the reality for disabled people a lot of the time. I do think that I must have spent half my budget before the pandemic going to various different hospital and doctor appointments that can now magically be done on Zoom. So you think, well, that's got to be a positive for the future for everyone, that you don't have to clog up hospitals and car parks and waiting rooms. You can just have an appointment from the comfort of your home, basically, and that allowed me then to have funds available to be able to do other things, and also shielding. So I kind of saved up quite a bit of money over the first 6 months or so. So once I was able to get out and about a wee bit again, I was able to go and visit family and stay for a few days and pay my PA that whole time. And you know what I mean? I was able then to do more and to be more kind of productive as well. The pandemic was good and bad. It doesn't bother me to be shielding at home as long as, like you say, you can trust who's coming in and out and all that kind of thing. But I think we're slightly, it was such a good sense of community and people were all helping each other out and helping each other get food and make sure they were all right and all that. I think we're slightly slipping back to being a wee bit more selfish now, where people are fed up with it and they don't want to consider us, they just want what suits them. And that's a bit, I don't really like that. I'd rather we remembered the community sort of spirit at the start, and we're all checking on each other and making sure everyone had access to everything that they need and had the support they needed and everything. So I don't know, maybe that a lot of people will remember that and a few positives will come out of it.
That's helpful. Susan, this what Nic and Michaela have said time with what you've heard from all of your users?
Say that last bit again, Lucy.
Is what Nic and Michaela have said echo what you've heard from ILF users in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And we immediately responded in an agile way in the pandemic to move into telephone support conversations and welfare conversations with people, because we recognised that a lot of the people that used ILF were, you know, really struggling because local authorities had either withdrawn or weren't able to support their part of the package. So we were, you know, stepped into that space and supported people as best we could. And the frustration with that was that, you know, unlike Michaela and Nic, that we couldn't take, you know, we couldn't support people in exactly your situation that had started using support after 2010, because that's when the fund closed. So that's my frustration. So we've spent time during the pandemic as well, using my leadership skills and opportunities to talk to as many people as possible around how do we reform that, how do we change, how do we reopen so that we can support more people in Scotland, more people in Northern Ireland. So we've been pushing those conversations really hard with the administrations in Northern Ireland and also in Scotland. We're getting more, we feel we're pushing at open doors now, which is fantastic. But the challenge is getting the finance people to come up with the pounds, shillings and pence. There I'm showing my age again. But you know, you have to remember I'm a disabled person too. And for me, I can see that it's a lot of barriers for me have been broken down, and it's enabled me to have more conversations, attend more meetings than normally I would have the energy for, because I would have to then, you know, go to the ILF. Probably I would have an overnight because I can't cope with the travel and working at ILF that day. So, you know, there was a lot of time spent creating opportunities for me to be in a place to be able to contribute. Whereas now I'm able to do kind of back-to-back meetings and to hopefully influence. But I do need to keep talking about disability, because that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about Zoom? You know, they see our faces, and a lot of the time for those of us who have a physical impairment only, perhaps have to actually almost like out ourselves. We have to come out of the disability closet and say, I'm a disabled person, these are the issues for me. So when we do go back to meeting face to face, you know, you'll need to enable that to happen for me. So I'm also the chair of the Golden Jubilee in the NHS, and I have had to go physically a few times. I would normally have gone up once a week, but I've only been, I think, four times maybe over the whole pandemic. And I'm a wheelchair user, but I don't use my wheelchair all the time. Sometimes I walk with a stick. So pre-pandemic, I hadn't had to use my wheelchair as much, but I was getting to the stage where I think, well, I'm going to have to for some of the outside stuff that we're doing, because we're building a new bit of the hospital. So it was a kind of learning experience for my colleagues. I kind of almost had to kind of like give them a bit of counselling to prepare them not to panic when I, you know, suddenly needed a bit of support with using my wheelchair. So that's been an interesting journey, I suppose, for me as a disabled person over the pandemic. But I really do think it has opened some doors as well. So it's about you two saying, how do we keep that? How do we hold on to that? That's really important.
Can I pick up quickly on just a couple of points you made there? It is frustrating that not everyone has the same access to this support. And there's also a bit of a guilt that comes with that, because you see people struggling and you think, I'm really lucky to have the care package that I've got, and I wish that other people could have that too. I feel quite guilty that I have that if they don't. And also you're saying about Zoom, like you have to out yourself as a disabled person. I'm fortunate enough to be able to communicate quite clearly, and just looking at my face, you wouldn't really know that I have all the disabilities that I have. So it's not until I turn up in person, and like you say, people are quite shocked because they just see you coming in this wheelchair and they're like, oh, right, okay, I didn't realise. but it shouldn't be a big deal. People should think, right, well, this is the person I've been talking to and communicating with, and oh, well, that's what you look like when you come in, and that's it. It shouldn't be, oh, what do we do now? So I think it's helped people to get to know people first as people, and then later find out, oh, that's a person with a disability, and know that it's not really a big deal.
That's a really great point, yeah.
Definitely. I think people that when they meet me on Zoom, I have a speech impediment. But yeah, definitely people have been inspired when I turn up in an electric wheelchair and carer. So yeah, definitely a different way of meeting people, isn't it? You will kind of talked about opening up now and coming out of lockdown and going back into lockdown. Who knows? How are you feeling about that? I know, Michaela, you go shooting. How do you feel about the changes? How the new rules, the lack of rules, all the rest of it? Should we start with Michaela?
Yeah, so I think the thing my academic background is in communications, so I think one of the things I'm most frustrated about is the communication of that. And I mean, we saw that in Northern Ireland last week. They announced COVID status passports, and the media continually call them COVID vaccination passports, and they're not, because you can also report a test result, so you don't have to be vaccinated. So I think that's the first thing I would say. We're not communicating clearly, and we're not communicating in a way that's accessible to everyone. We saw that with the UK government not having sign language interpretation. And we also see that with the language that they're using, it's not plain English. And so many friends were coming to me asking me what was actually going on, because the information was not accessible to them. So I think that's the first thing I would say that was really frustrating for me. And it was heightened by the fact we were, and still really are, in an emergency situation. And that emergency information needs to be accessible to everybody. But I think in terms of the rules themselves, I am feeling safer now that we do have COVID status requirements than I did 2 weeks ago. I feel a lot safer for that, and that's even with an emerging variant. So I think we were really the forefront of people's minds for the first 6 months in that decision-making process that was going on in central government. And for whatever reason, that all started to fall away, and it became about getting the economy up and running. And we know the purple pound is worth over £200 billion a year to the UK alone. And that is a lot of money, and we can't reopen the economy without us. And the shielders are a large part of that economy that is now being lost. So I am slightly frustrated that we have kind of been forgotten, and been kind of forgotten within that. But I do think a lot of the changes that are coming through, the more increased focus on virtual participation in particular, but also what I have noticed is a massive increase in the amount of disabled people interested in politics and feeling like that's something they might be able to do. I mean, I think that's a massive positive. We need more disabled people in public life and making decisions around all of those tables. And I hope that actually in 5 years we'll look back and we'll say, you know what, how good was that for our society? it was really bad at the time, really frightening at the time. We lost a lot of people we shouldn't have. But actually it's been really good for our community and our society as a whole. But I think, you know, on a final point in terms of the rules and regulations, I think, you know, it's evident in the fact that almost 2/3 of deaths during the pandemic were disabled people. It's evident within that statistic that we were very much not at the forefront as time went on. And that's a really disappointing statistic. And it's something that we as a society will have to live with. But I really, really, really hope that now we're in a bit of a better position, that actually those rules and regulations will help us and move us forward. And you know, that will inform future legislation to make sure that we're actually treated properly.
Yeah, you've touched on a couple of things there, Michaela, that I was going to talk about. I think we were quite fortunate in Scotland that the Scottish government seemed to be a wee bit more cautious than the rest of the UK and seemed to, like, for example, we're still mask wearing and England and Wales and that aren't. But they were also quite good with communication, because I was getting regular text updates as a person on the shielding list with information. And ILF have been great with that as well, getting lots of information from Independent Living Fund, and they had supplied letters from my PAs and stuff like that, so that they had key worker status and they could still travel and get into shops and things. But the main thing I was going to talk about is that there needs to be more people with disabilities in politics. But even to consider myself doing that, there's so many barriers. There needs to be a lot more support, and there needs to be more sort of protection for people that get into, whether they have a disability or not, for people that get into politics, because they're just completely scrutinised. You know, doesn't matter, you can't do right for doing wrong, you're torn apart on social media, it doesn't matter what, you know, party or whatever. There's a lot of physical barriers, but there's also a lot of like emotional barriers and stuff. That the impact on people's emotional and mental health has been, you know, a lot of people have took quite a dump from being shut in or shielding or whatever, and not having the same amount of social contact. So there's a lot of people who maybe need a wee bit more support with their mental health as well as physical. But it would be beneficial, I think, to everyone if you could have more people with disabilities able to be supported to get into politics. Because if you're a disabled person, you're used to having to plan ahead and having to consider other people, having to consider, you know, your PAs and whether they're going to be able to do that day or, you know, drive that far or whatever it is that you're doing. So I think just general life skills, if you have a disability, make you prepared for that kind of role. And it would be nice to see more people doing it, because we did have, with the Scottish Government updates for the pandemic, we did have sign language interpreters, and we did have, like I say, good communication for those shields and things like that. So it would be nice to keep that kind of thing going, and to make sure that we're considering everyone in every kind of situation and that no one's left out.
I can jump in there just really quickly. One of the things that I am probably quite known for is saying that disabled people are naturally entrepreneurial. So by that I don't mean we all go and set up our own businesses, but we are very creative. We're used to problem solving. We think on our feet. Pardon the pun. But you know, but
you have to adapt and adjust and you know.
Yeah, and we miss that in society, and that is the single most massive opportunity that COVID presents, and it will be a real blemish on society if we don't capture that and we don't take it and run with it.
Yeah, I completely agree with what the two of you are saying, and I know as a disabled leader in the field that I'm in, that there's not very many of people like me about, to be honest. And there are some people that live with long-term conditions, but a lot of people are very, they're not very open about that, you know, whereas I've always campaigned for disability equality. I was one of the people that introduced disability equality as a concept to Scotland in the late 80s, and I worked with other disabled people, training them, and worked with organisations to look at the policies and procedures and see where they could be breaking down the barriers. So there's not an awful lot of people who get that kind of stuff in leadership roles. Inclusion Scotland is one of the disabled people's organisations in Scotland, and they fund support for getting more disabled people into politics. And I know that at the last election, Pam Duncan Glancy was appointed as an MP from Glasgow, and she's now very prominent in the Parliament and speaking out about these issues. So it's great to have Pam in that position, but we can't burden her with everything. She can't alone be flying the equality flag for everything.
Exactly.
With disability issues, LGBTQI plus issues, all the rest of it. So I know she's doing a brilliant job, but I think she needs a few pals.
I say it's a tag team. It's not. It's never solo race for us as a community. I always like Toy Story at the end of Toy Story 3, and they're taking it in turns with the rough kids. I always liken it to something like that. You need to take it in turns and deal with what you can deal with when you can, because we're human, we're not robots. But it's. I mean, I seen Pam's election from here, and it's just such a massive step forward. And I know with Inclusion Scotland's work, and I'm like, in Northern Ireland, we could be doing this. We're not all that similar to Scotland. Why can we not do those sorts of things? And we're not. So, the government ministers that know me may watch out, because I think it's high time we were doing those sorts of programs here.
So we've talked a bit about what next, and you've all spoken very powerfully about the need for more representation. But for the average disabled person, or even field help, what do you think would be the one thing that you would like to see that you think would give you more rights, more access, and improve your ability to be part of the community, everything that we care about as disability rights activists? What one thing would you like to see?
Well, it's equality, and like we've been talking about, it's visibility and representation. So being treated as a person first, and a person who happens to have a disability is second. That disability being less relevant because society's barriers are broken down.
I think it's the attitudinal issues, isn't it? If everybody themselves as a disabled person can be supported to have a positive attitude around life, and it's really hard. That can be hard sometimes because of all the barriers that people experience and the exclusion. And you Nic, you touched on the social media thing and how cruel people can be on there. So we need a level playing field across that. And I think if you've got the right attitude, you're supposed to have the right attitude in life, and the people you come up against have got an empathetic, compassionate attitude towards us as disabled people, the rest of the barriers kind of melt away almost, don't they? You can get round a lot of the other things if people have got
sorry, and that's what I kind of meant by seeing you as a person first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important.
I think for me, it's a shift in the way we think from equality to inclusion. For me, equality has kind of been reached. We're there in the eyes of the law, certainly, and we're there in the eyes of a lot of businesses. And I think we're at equality, and I think we've proven that doesn't work. And I know that's a bit controversial of me. I think we need to move to inclusion. It's not just about having equal rights in the law, it's about that working in practice. And for that work to work in practice, we need inclusion. So I think we need to start talking about inclusion in terms of education, in terms of employment, in terms of social life and leisure and all of those things that encapsulates your entire life. And for me, it's about I've made a very conscious decision over the last 3 or 4 years to stop saying I'm not equal and saying I'm not included. Because in theory, probably I'm equal. But in practice, that's not working. And that's what I would like to see across the board, is that we start talking about inclusion and that disabled people or any other minority group are included. And I think part of the way we need to achieve that is by working across all of those minority groups. We need to work together. We all have different things that we need to happen to make that a reality, but we all need to learn from one another too. And certainly the LGBTQ community were, so instrumental for us back in the 80s. They were there when we needed them, and I hope that I'm there for those who need me in that community. But I think we can do a lot more with that in other marginalised and oppressed communities to see inclusion become a reality.
Well, I think inclusion will become a reality in a great place to end. Just hoping that we see that change quickly. Sadly, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you to all of you for sharing their thoughts and their opinions, and I think you've all given our audience something to think about. So thank you. I'm gonna hand over to Susan to just tell our audience how they can get more information about the ILF.
Yeah, well, we have an active website and Facebook page. So if you Google Independent Living Fund Scotland, you'll be able to find out all the information and tell us your thoughts and continue to stay in touch with us and help our campaign to bring about the ILF for more people that deserve it in both Scotland and independent and in Ireland, Northern Ireland. It's been lovely to be part of it. Thank you so much, Lucy, for chairing. It was really great. And it's lovely to again. You, Nic.
To Nic and Michaela.
Thank you.
Thank you.